The Architecture Center is this black building located above the Riverwalk at Michigan and Lakeshore Drive. Sorry, not Michigan and that, which is Michigan Avenue and, sorry, Wacker. I'm looking at Lakeshore Drive, sorry. Up there, your ticket is good for 7 days for a discount for you to enter there. There's a 2-story interactive exhibit about the history of Chicago. There's also some souvenirs you can get there, but nothing beats what you're going to get from Jennifer here on the river itself. She's an absolute expert in the history of the river, the history of the architecture, and the history of Chicago itself. So please, give it up for Jennifer.
Am I on now? Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here and spending the next 90 minutes with you talking about Chicago and Chicago architecture. Now, I'm from Chicago. I lived in Chicagoland my entire life, and I'm always in awe of the city and its beautiful skyline. Now, of course, today we're going to talk about that architecture. We're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about design. We're going to talk about engineering. But I'm a history girl, so I'm going to talk about the stories and the people behind what makes this city so great. Waterway, about 2 feet deep. Didn't have the boats on it like it does today. It was inhabited on both sides by the Potawatomi. They were an indigenous group that resided in the area and still lives in this area today. Now, they grew an onion or a garlic type plant. Today we call it a ramp, but back in the day they called it a shikakwa, which is where we get the name Chicago from. Now, it was in about the mid-1600s, we had the first non-native explorers in this area, Joliet and Marquette, and they came down from Wisconsin. And they saw that this area had a great potential to link the different waterways. The temples at each of the corners are like water towers. And the part at the top, that temple at the top was originally used for storage. In 1937, it's transformed into a club called the Stratosphere. And there's a rumor going around that was either owned or frequented by Al Capone. However, that just is not true. By 1937, Prohibition was over. Remember, I mentioned the 1909 plan of Chicago with that double-decker bridge. Well, this was another aspect that was suggested in the 1909 plan of Chicago, a public river walk. It took about another 100 years, but we finally got it. Now, it took 100 years and an act of Congress. So before, you would have to go upstairs. There was no passageways underneath the bridges. You would have to go up the stairs, go over the bridge, and come down the stairs once again to get to the other side. That act of Congress allowed those passageways underneath the bridges. Each section of the Riverwalk has a different purpose, like dining, relaxing, entertainment. Continuing on our left, we have 77 West Wacker that has the triangle at the top. And the columns coming down, that is from 1993. This is another example of postmodern architecture. I mentioned it a couple of times, but what exactly is it? Postmodern draws upon the past styles. It exaggerates and it emphasizes different parts. This, in particular, draws upon the Beaux art style. The triangle at the top, that's a pediment, which was often seen in Greek and Roman architecture. The columns going down the front of the building, the side of the building, those aren't structural. They're just for decoration. This is a building that is a reference upon reference building. A lot of architecture are left. It's a limestone building, has a setback. A lot of people say it looks like an armchair. I think it looks like a high chair. But because that's all perspective, right? That is from 1930 by Halliburton and Root. Is the LaSalle Wacker building. It's our first Art Deco building of the tour. And the bridge houses on either side of the movable bridges that we have here. Bridge tenders at the time, they used to have houses on the bridges and they would stay there of making sure the bridges go up and down for passing boats. They had a lot of duties. They were essentially lifeguards for people that fell off the bridges. They would help out with fires, or they were emergency personnel. So they had a big job on these bridges. So it's not a dull moment there. Now on our left-hand side, you'll see a building with like 2 toothpicks sticking out of the corners. That's T24, or West Wacker, sorry. T24 West Wacker. And this is another postmodern building. And this building only makes sense here on the Chicago River. You have the reference to the river. We have the reference to Chicago right there. Continuing on our left-hand side, we have the curved glass building, green-blue glass building. That's 333 West Wacker by KPF. It's from 1983. Yet another postmodern building. This one draws loosely upon the Chicago style of architecture, which has a tripartite design. Tri meaning three, and it has three parts: the base at the bottom, the shaft in the middle, and the capitol at the top. Now straight ahead of us, you'll notice a building that has an arc at the bottom and an arc at the top. That is River Point by Picard Chilton from 2017. Now you notice at the bottom too, there are those porthole window things right there. Well, those aren't actually windows. Now as we turn, we're going to go to the north branch of the river here. We're going to talk about the oldest building on our tour today. It's on our left-hand side. It's that salmon-colored brick building. That's from 1898. It's by Frank Abbott, and it's called Fulton House. Oh, that shade feels good, doesn't it? Holy cow. The townhouse is here, 2 floor plans. And Harry Weiss was in the Navy. He was an avid avid sailor. Sorry, I was supposed to say salesman. And you can see that in this building with these circular staircases, the porthole windows, the emphasis on these triangle shapes. All of it kind of has a nautical feel to it. 3 of the original tenants still live in this building, a low building. This is the East Bank Club. It's a premier fitness facility. If you're looking to see any Chicago celebrities working out, they will probably be working out here. Now, originally, this building did not have windows on this side. It was constructed in 1979 by Levin and Associates, and in the 1970s, this river was kind of gross. In 1998, the city of Chicago passed an ordinance that all new construction buildings or adaptively reused buildings along the river had to include a public river walk. So it is there today. It is an industrial warehouse building, but also as we pass by, you'll see kind of at boat level, those decorations there at Art Deco, stylized looking butterflies or leaves right there. So it kind of has a little bit of an Art Deco flair. The river actually continues to the left and it circles around, creating Chicago's only island, Goose Island. Anybody hear the beer Goose Island? Yeah? Well, there's no beer brewed on this island, but that's where the name comes from. There's not much on this island right now, but in the next few years, we're going to start to see some residential buildings go up there. If we take a look down the river as the river continues, it's a little bit more industrial. It's kind of what the river used to look like. And Captain's going to turn us around right here. This building was completed in 1971 by Minoru Yamasaki. He is the same architect of the Twin Towers in New York City that fell in September of 2001. Now, when the architects designed this building, they thought that they'd make good use of the river and have newsprint delivered by barge. However, what they didn't anticipate is that the river isn't actually deep enough for a giant barge to come through with newsprint. It was originally used to bring that newsprint actually to Chicago's other major newspaper, the Chicago Sun-Times, which used to have a printing facility on the river. Now it's up 364 days of the year. It's lowered once a year to make sure that it still works, so functions correctly. You might be saying, well, why don't you just tear it down if nobody really uses it anymore? Well, I guess it's actually cheaper to keep it up than it is to tear it down. Now this has a couple of features that allow it to stand up. Has the largest I-beams in the world, has some of the strongest steel in the United States, and then also, if you notice, a major portion of it faces south-southwest, meaning it gets those strong winds coming into Chicago. So there is drama happening inside the building here. This flat portion of the building is actually where the stage is. And the Civic Opera House is the second largest opera house in the United States. Bruce Graham, I'd like you to remember that name. He'll come up again in a minute. Now, these are done in the mid-century modern style. Again, we have the repetition of the windows. We have this black steel and glass. We have the square shape or rectangle shape to it. Mid-century modern building has that curve to it, that blue glass-ish looking thing. It's by James DeStefano of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. This is done in postmodern style. The curve actually references a more sharper curve that used to be here in the river. Engineers had kind of straightened that out. But then look at the corners of each of those panes of glass. They're pinched in the corners. And that represents the ripples of the Chicago River. Right, one that kind of looks like has a pleated front to it or side to it. That is the Cooper. And the one to the right of that, that dark building, is the Reed. Now, of course, they will have to have public river walk, but they're taking it a step further. They're going to include an amphitheater, a kayak launch, a water taxi stop, made by Bertrand Goldberg from 1986. Now, Bertrand Goldberg was actually a student of Mies van der Rohe. They kind of look different, but I'd like to argue that this is still mid-century modern. It has that smoothness to it. There's a lack of ornamentation. It has that regularity, even though it's a little bit different. And then you can see how the building stands up, those columns going directly down. And a little while ago, I know I have some friends here from New York. A little while ago, there was a dispute when One World Trade Center in New York was being built. What was going to be taller, the Willis Tower or One World Trade Center? Well, One World Trade Center has a stick on the top of it. It's called a spire. Now, if you break off that spire, you pick up the One World Trade Center, you put it next to the Willis Tower, the black part of the Willis Tower is taller. But the U.S. Council of Tall Buildings came in and said, no, that spire, that's architectural. That counts. Those antennae on the top of the Willis Tower, those are not architectural. They do not count. So technically, One World Trade Center is taller. It pains me to say that. If you know anything about Chicagoans, you know that we hate to be second to New York for anything, but what are you going to do? I want to point out the one with the pyramid at the top and the statue on top of that. That is the Chicago Board of Trade by Hullabird and Root from 1930. It's Art Deco. Trust me, it looks like an armchair from the front. But what I really want to focus on is that pyramid at the top. Again, we're in the 1920s. Why would that have a pyramid at the top? Well, think about it. King Tut's tomb was just discovered, and Egyptology was all the craze. So it started getting into our architecture. Statue. So that truss or that jungle gym at the top is actually what is holding the building up. I love this because the architect or engineer could have covered that truss, but they left it exposed to show us how the building is standing up. Coming up on our left-hand side, you have a giant building. I want you to notice those pyramids at the corner and in the center. There's a merchandise mart from 1930. By Graham Anderson, Probst and White, and it's in the Art Deco style. We have the emphasis on the vertical. We have those pyramids at the corners. So again, we have another city within a city. Next to that, we have the AMA Plaza. It was originally the IBM building, that black steel and glass building. That's from 1971. By Mies van der Rohe. So this is a great juxtaposition of the student and the teacher. Now this looks like this building can be anywhere and be for anything, but this building was actually specifically designed for IBM. The 1970s, you can imagine computers were giant. They're heavy. Well, all the floors in this building are reinforced. Also, computers were very hot, could produce a lot of energy, a lot of heat. This is the first use of double glazed windows in architecture, try to regulate the temperature of the building within the building. Mies died in 1969, so he was not here to see it completed. But when he was in his wheelchair, he would ask his caretaker to bring him down to this building to make sure it was being done correctly. Now the next building, I can never remember the name of it. Oh wait, there it is. That is the Trump International Hotel and Tower. It's from 2009 by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. And I mentioned contemporary architecture earlier in the tour, but I didn't really define what it is. I think it's a combination of mid-century modern and postmodern. Mid-century modern, you have that smoothness of the glass. You have the lack of ornamentation. You have the columns going down at the bottom that show you how it stands up. But I also think it's postmodern. It has this curve representing the curve of the river. It has this blue glass representing the river as well. And then you have these setbacks in the building. Those setbacks refer to historic buildings around here within its neighborhood. With the NBC peacock, that colorful peacock right below it. That's the NBC Tower by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill from 1989. That's done in the postmodern style. Postmodern again, bringing back elements of previous styles. So you have that emphasis on the vertical, like Art Deco. But then check out those stylized flying buttresses, those upside down capital L's. Those are in direct reference to the Tribune Tower that's right in front of it. Imagine this. It's a dark and stormy night. George Streeter and his wife Maria are on their boat on Lake Michigan. They get washed up onto a sandbar and they get stuck. Well, instead of going for help, George Streeter actually thinks, well, this is great. I'll plant my flag here. This is now the Republic of Lake Michigan. He claims it as a new state. Well, City of Chicago didn't really pay much attention. They continued pushing. Marissa, they filled this with landfill. They continued pushing landfill in this area, and Streeter kept on claiming that land as well. As a matter of fact, it got to about 180 acres that Streeter claimed. He eventually built a 2-story house. Other people started moving onto the land. They started building their own houses. So, of course, Streeter started charging rent. And now, of course, here in Chicago, like I mentioned, we do love the irony. So he named the neighborhood after him. It's now called Streeterville. Not only that, we have a statue of Streeter in Streeterville. He was quite a character. He's known for wearing a silk top hat wherever he went. So we have him in his silk top hat right there in Streeterville. Continuing on our left, you'll see a crane. That's a construction site. And actually, that was the original place where the spire was supposed to be. If you know anything about Chicago architecture history, we were originally going to get a soaring skyscraper there called the Spire by Santiago Calatrava. Santiago Calatrava was the guy who did that swirling red sculpture. Well, apparently he loves swirls, because this one in the renderings was going to look like a birthday candle or like a unicorn horn. Well, funding fell through, the project fell through in 2016, but Chicagoans were left with a giant hole in the ground there. On the left-hand side, we have Lake Point Tower by Schubert Heinrich from 1968. And it has that curving look to it, that black steel and glass building. Now you may be saying, Jennifer, I thought you said that no buildings are going to be built on the lakefront anymore. Well, are there any attorneys on board? No, your friend outed you. Well, it was an attorney that discovered a loophole in the city ordinance, and that building was built. People were not too happy about it, but it has come to be an icon of Chicago architecture. I like to think of it as the love child between Bertram Goldberg and Mies van der Rohe. You have that smoothness, that glass and steel of Mies van der Rohe, but you have that curve that Bertram Goldberg really liked. But what I want to talk about right now is the Ferris wheel. Ferris wheel was invented in Chicago for the 1893 World's Fair as an answer to Paris's Eiffel Tower that they constructed for their own World's Fair a few years earlier. Now, the original Ferris wheel was 3 times this size. It was huge.